Hello and welcome to this week's video analysis for virtualracingschool.com. This week we're at Interlagos in the GT3 series, and once again we'll be looking at the Z4. You can also find data packs for the Z4 and the Audi on virtualracingschool.com. I probably will be doing an Audi analysis video at some point to mix it up, but for now we're focusing on the Z4 again. So Interlagos is one of the few circuits in iRacing still used in F1, and it's definitely a favourite among many drivers, including myself, for its flowing nature and elevations. So to keep the instruction more concise, we'll be carrying out a full analysis from a replay of a couple of my hot laps on qualifying fuel from this week onwards. Okay, so what I'm going to do is play the fastest of the two laps, 1 minute 32.1. Again, pretty good lap. It was actually on the second of a 2-lap run, as you can see. So the tyres were past their best, and they were actually beginning to fall off towards the end of the lap. So it is possible to do 31s for sure in default weather. Yeah, so I will get that playing for you. So you could probably see there towards the end of the lap, just struggling to get the front end to work as well as I wanted it to be. Keeping really close to the inside wall here as I cross the line to minimise the distance. It's not really worth that much, to be honest. It's probably, a few hundredths, if that, 1 or 2 hundredths. But every little counts. So what I'm going to do is go back to the start of the first flying lap, and we'll play a section of each and analyse it afterwards. So there we go. Braking about 50 metres there into second gear. Lots of curb and lots of curb again there. And you're really trying to keep it flat out, so the line is very, very important there. If I go back a little bit here, so your positioning of the car, in fact, let's go all the way back. We'll get to that in a second. So obviously you're thinking about your braking point. You've got a lot of time to think very long straight. You're probably targeting 50 meters. If we slow it down, we'll see exactly where I apply the brakes. It's about 50 meters. So again, similar to Monza, generally when you have a straight line braking, your braking is going to be very consistent. So hard on immediately, and then maybe drop it down slightly as the speed shaves off. But at this point, I'm sort of starting to turn in, and it's only here that the brake pressure really starts to fall away, because otherwise you're just going to be asking too much from the tyres. So again, a tiny bit of maintenance throttle, tiny bit of trail braking. So I'm right up on that curb. That's quite important. Ooh, that's a lot of curb there. You may not have to take quite as much as that. That's probably the maximum that you would need. And then you give it a spurt of throttle again. Off the throttle. Back. So I'm off the throttle just before the first of the center S's, I believe. So I'm aiming over here, basically. And that's because I want to be as far over here as possible, because there's a long straight, and I want to keep as much throttle as I can throughout this exit here. So I'm right up over this curb, getting back on the throttle. Now you can kind of judge when you feel like you want to commit to full throttle. And I think I actually carry full throttle right the way through this. When the tyres start to go off, you find you have to lift a bit more. But the way the car works, the Z4 especially, is it likes you to commit to the throttle. So when you're getting to a point when you want to get on the throttle, you've got to commit to it. Otherwise, once you start lifting off, eventually you'll shave enough speed off to get the car turned, but initially you're going to have that understeer, which you want to try and avoid if possible. The other thing is you want to just hook up just a little bit. So I'm staying on that curb there, just hooking up to the inside for a long time, and that helps the car keep stuck. So into turn 4 that was. On this first lap I actually dropped down to second gear there. We'll watch on board. So I dropped down to second gear, which I don't normally do, and I don't advise doing, but the car felt a little bit understeery here. So I thought, let's drop it down to second gear, but it cost me on the exit there. As I got back on the power, hard on the power, I got a bit too much oversteer, which you can see. But yes, so in terms of braking point for this section, there's a grey patch of tarmac on the right. You want to be braking just before there. So let's slow that down. And it literally is just before. And then just come off the brakes gently. Trail braking there because I'm detecting the understeer. I've still got understeer, but I've dropped it down to second. And now I'm full throttle and I've got this oversteer, which can be really nasty. If it's bad, it can send you off over here. That's not where you want to be. And then for the exit, you're keeping it nice and tight. Obviously, it depends on your mid-corner speed as to how wide you're going to be on the exit. But generally, you want to be keeping the car nice and tight. So I'm just going to play it full speed up through towards turns 6 and 7. So it's quite tentative there, and also quite slow on the exit. I have this curb here on the left, which you can use. You won't get a 1x if you commit more than I did there. I didn't really commit very much, and I do commit more on the next lap. So when we get to that, I'll run you through that. So the other thing is I'm a little bit early on the brakes as well. Generally for this corner, you do want to be tight for the first apex, So it's better to be earlier on the brakes than it is to be later, because then you're fighting understeer and you have to shave a lot of speed off to get the car back to where you need it to be. So generally it is good to have a slightly tentative entry to this, but kind of roll it in and keep it tight. So I'm not braking fully, kind of rolling it. I've made contact with that first curb, which is fine, that's good. The issue is I'm a little bit down on speed. Bring it forward. Back on the throttle now. So there, I'm too late to get back on the throttle. So I've wasted opportunity, I've wasted available grip. But despite that, you don't want to deliberately steer the car over here. You want the car to end up over here because of the speed you've carried, not because you're steering over there. You always want to be keeping the car as tight as you can, but you'll aim for a speed that forces the car to be running out using all of the track. And then entering turn 8, I believe. This is definitely a tricky braking zone for sure. Probably the most tricky braking zone on the circuit, simply because you're turning whilst braking. And a lot of the time you'll end up on this curve as well, which makes things a little bit more tricky. But the main thing is to not brake at 100% pressure, because you're asking the car, the tyres to turn and brake, which obviously isn't going to work so well. And also you're not carrying as much speed as, say, braking into turn 1 where you've got all that downforce. So yeah, about 70% on the brakes, rolling in, coming off the brakes gently, trailing the brakes. Now aiming for the middle of this curb. That's probably about right, actually. And this is how much curb they use in reality, or at least in Formula 1, because it's a very flat curb, and there's definitely time to be found by cutting it a lot. So I was actually trail braking there very, very deep into the corner. So you see my braking here. Still on the brakes, still on the brakes, still on the brakes. Just 10%. Now I'm back on the power about 60-70%. Any more than that and I'll get too much oversteer. Now I commit to full throttle just for a very, very short period of time. And then another dab on the brakes. Waiting, back on the power, full power. So this next left-hander, you can definitely roll through it, which is what I'm doing. No pedal inputs at all. That's quite unusual, really. And then back on the power. So the other thing is I've let the car run out quite wide, and I'm opening the steering up. You see my steering angle here? Opening it up as I'm applying the throttle, anticipating oversteer, essentially. Now, for this series of laps, I was using the shadow from the tree here as my braking reference for turn 10. But obviously that's weather dependent, so you can't rely on that. What other references we can use? We can see this curb here starting on the right. So if you're approaching this corner looking towards the apex, then you can use that as a reference, the start of this curb. And you probably require even less braking pressure into here than the previous right-hander. Because again it's lower speed, and again you're turning at the same time. So on the brakes, about 70% off the brakes, trail braking. Now you probably noticed there that I'm not cutting the corner anywhere near as much. That's because this is a taller curb, so you can't get away with cutting it as much, and this is reflected in real life also. Straightening the steering as I apply the throttle. See that again. So trail braking very late there. Back on the power, opening the steering up. Now I get to full power. So there's no rush for me to get to full power. My initial my initial application to the throttle is very sudden, but it's not full throttle. This is kind of my driving style, but I think it also works well with the Z4. Because the tyres can cope with 78% out of a slow corner, but you've got to be a bit patient until you get to full throttle. Obviously the car's got traction control, but you don't want to be relying on that if you can avoid it. So yeah. Now, this is a very tricky corner. It's very dependent on line, turn 11. And it kind of lures you into wanting to take more and more speed each time. But it can't quite be taken flat out, or at least not in default weather. So we'll just play through that. So I'm off the throttle completely. Short shifting into fourth and then full throttle is what I chose to do on this lap. So let's see that again. So as I've turned in, I've dropped to 80%. A bit of understeer there, so I'm off the throttle completely and then hard back on the throttle. But what you can't see is, yeah, unfortunately my steering wheel's concealing it, but I have short shifted to fourth in between the lift. So I'm lifting just before that point actually. In third, now lifting fourth. And that because it just reduces the engine torque slightly and also allows me to get back to full throttle. I'll let it play through here. Letting it run out all the way. So you'll notice that I run very, very wide on the entry into, it's not really the last corner technically, but it's the last corner in terms of driving. It's the last corner where you're actually coming off the throttle. So if I slow that down, I'm all the way onto this, I don't really know what to call it. Anyway, so I'm over the white line, but for whatever reason iRacing have chosen not to give 1x's for this. So, and there's plenty of grip. It has almost as much grip as the tarmac. So this last corner here, well, the last proper corner here, is all about the exit. So you watch any quick guys, they'll all be doing this. I'm not braking fully there. About 80%. Go back inside. And this corner is all about the exit. It's literally all about the exit. You've got to make sure that you carry the speed out of the corner. So you can afford to hook up more with the inside curb there. I didn't on this particular occasion. I always find myself running too wide. I don't know why that is, but yeah, I do struggle with that. But yeah, so before the apex here, I'm coming back onto the throttle. Not full throttle though, about 80%. Now I've committed to full throttle, and I'm opening the steering again. Common theme. Full throttle, opening the steering, because a lot of the time you get oversteer there. So you've got to kind of anticipate it. You want to keep the car as straight as you possibly can, so you're getting as clean an exit as possible. You want a nice, clean, smooth exit with no drama. And then through, these are actually corners. This is turn 15. It's all about keeping tight and keeping the steering angle to a minimum. Basically joining it all up into one really, really long radius corner. Okay, so the reason one of the many reasons why that lap was actually slower than the next lap was because I was too cautious into turn 1. So if you see this next lap, I'll be slightly more committed. Braking again about 50 meters. But this part here I'm more committed. Earlier on the throttle. And you can go on virtual racing school, look at my data pack, look at my telemetry, compare the 2 laps, and you'll see that I was earlier on the throttle. You'll see that I was carrying more speed. So into here, I choose to keep it in 3rd gear. As a result, the car is more settled on the exit. And here I'm braking later. Got a bit more speed at this point. Hesitating a lot on the throttle there. So look at this trail braking. The car is always understeering as you're approaching this, or as you're kind of around this first apex. And the way to kind of minimize that is to trail brake. Still trail braking, still trail braking. Now I'm hard on the power. That hard on the power gets the car turned in, but then you have to be careful with it. So I've come off again, and then hard on the power again. So I've ended up right the way onto this curb. So on the previous lap my car was about here, whereas this time I'm over here. I'm still trying to keep it over here, but the extra speed has forced me out wide, which is a good thing because it's now given me a wider entry to this next corner. Again, trail braking, all of the curb, that was nice. Back on the power. Do I go to full power? Very briefly. On the brakes. Rolling, being patient. Back on the power, 80%. Full power. Not quite as wide on the exit on this lap. Now at this point, the car is noticeably less grippy, so I have to be a little bit more patient exiting this corner. So just being patient with it, gently turning the car in, back on the power, but slightly more cautious on that last deliverance. So I'm going to run this next corner at full speed because you're going to see my hesitation. The car's got too much understeer at this point, and I'm not able to commit as fully as I was on the previous lap. So I've lost a tenth through this final section of the corner, purely, probably more than that actually. Again, you can see this in the telemetry, but I'll just play it now. Off the throttle, another lift. So you'll see that there's a lift, then a lift, another lift. So full power, off the throttle as before, feeling for grip, off the power fully, still trying to get grip, no grip, and there was a final lift. That lift there. Another one there. And still, despite all the lifting, that's the issue. If you do commit too early to the throttle, there's not much you can do about it. Because lifting out of the power will induce understeer. So you have to lift a lot to get the car back to where you need it to be. So it really is, in the Z4, it really is about getting the mid-corner right. Okay, so I've ended up wider at this point. If you look here, this is very, very close to a 1x. That is literally as close, within a centimetre probably, of getting 1x. Bringing it back slightly and then back out again, because I'm desperate to get, I know it's a good lap, apart from that I'm desperate to make up for it, and again I'm a little bit wide. So here you'd want the car to be just clipping this curb, but despite that, still a pretty good exit. Still a pretty good exit. steering inputs to a minimum using all the track, and then to the line, keeping it really tight because I've got no more fuel for any more laps. So even if it doesn't gain me much, it's going to make me feel that I've gotten everything out of it. Okay, so there we are. As per last week, I recommend going back to the beginning of the video and watching the full speed lap, knowing what you've heard, and you'll look at it in a different light, and you'll notice things that you didn't notice before. So again, I hope this has been helpful. Yeah, see you guys next week. Bye.